and assist users who may have been targeted by state-sponsored attackers. These users are individually targeted because of who they are or what they do. That India was looking to award spyware contracts beyond NSO Group and Pegasus because of the adverse public reaction, which approximately is 16 million US dollars and potentially may escalate to $120 million. Now they are happening right before we enter a very contentious general election, but also there are 5 state assembly elections which are coming up for polls within, I would say, 2-3 weeks, right, with results, in a sense that they are parliamentarian, they have to talk to their constituents, they have to take care, they have to possibly access the parliamentary portal, they have to do all kinds of things in order to fulfill their job function. Its legality is questionable, right? However, the government of India, in its statement when the Pegasus controversy happened on the floor of the House, for public order or in the interests of the security of the state. Where is the interest of the security of the state or public order by surveilling journalists and opposition leaders or leaders of think tanks? People who have no criminal cases against them, people who will, to a large extent, be challenging government power.
At least 6 members of parliament, all of them from opposition parties, and a few journalists have come out and said that their Apple devices have gotten an alert which has alerted them that there could have been a state-sponsored surveillance attack on them. To understand what this means, I'm being joined by lawyer and security expert Apar Gupta. Apar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I'm going to start with the basics. For our viewers, can you just explain what the alert said and what does it really mean?
Okay, so Pooja, thank you so much for having me here. The first thing is I'm not per se a security expert, but in my training as a lawyer, I've looked at how such similar malware attacks have happened. What's important for people to know is that, firstly, what has happened today and has it happened in the past? Okay, which helps us gather a greater degree of context as to why they should care about it. So the first thing is that Priyanka Chaturvedi, who happens to be a member of parliament, posted a screenshot on Twitter/the X platform, which is a threat notification which he received from Apple. Apple is the company which also manufactures the iPhone, and it also is interested in maintaining the security of the devices and products that it offers. And sometime back, they started a program in which they would notify their users if the smartphone would be coming under an attack by what they called as a state level adversary. This was a threat notification system which they built. So it is not specific only to India. It has actually been globally deployed. As per their own release, Apple threat notifications are designed to inform and assist users who may have been targeted by state-sponsored attackers. These users are individually targeted because of who they are or what they do. So, Pooja, going back to what you stated, at least 6 opposition politicians, most of whom happen to be members of parliament, like Priyanka Chaturvedi, Mahua Mohitra, and then subsequent to them, Sitaram Yechuri, Pawan Khera, Raghav Chadda, Shashi Tharoor, Supriya Srinate, as well as the head of the influential ORF think tank, Samir Saran, have posted similar screenshots. So these screenshots are essentially notifications from Apple, which are individually being sent to them, saying that a state level adversary has tried to either successfully or unsuccessfully get into their smartphones in order to surveil their activities. Okay. And what would it do in a smartphone is also being explained by Apple, in which it says that it has the ability of hearing your calls, accessing your phone book, switching on your microphone, switching on your camera, and also accessing all your pictures and videos which you've shot with the phone. In effect, it is a form of total surveillance in which a member of parliament may not know that a state level actor, which may be India or which may be another country, has gathered all this information. Now I'll come to the second part. What's the precedent and why are we concerned? And why are people inferring that this may be actually an act by the government of India? Now, there's a reasonable basis for this. So, firstly, there have been reports of the Indian government using the Pegasus spyware by the NSO Group, which is an Israeli firm, which came in October 2019. and targeted activists. And subsequently, there was another round of disclosures by what was called as the Pegasus project in July 2021, which was also including public officials, journalists, and again, members of parliament. And this led to a petition being filed, several petitions being filed by journalists as well as politicians in the Supreme Court of India, where the union government, when it appeared, did not clearly deny that it actually used or procured Pegasus before the Supreme Court of India. It, in fact, initially even refused to file an affidavit in the Supreme Court. And in the absence of a denial, what we do have are reports by Amnesty, Citizen Lab, as well as notifications from WhatsApp. So this is a different company. This is not Apple, which confirmed that in October 2019 and July 2021, some of the people who approached the Supreme Court, their phones were actually infected. The second thing, which is important for us to consider as to whether the Indian government actually utilized these, is the credibility of Apple and these threat notifications. Now, Access Now, which is an international digital rights nonprofit, and Citizen Lab, which is a technical institute which investigates this in Canada, last month confirmed the validity of Apple's threat notifications, which were sent to Russian journalists, including Medusa's publishers, which take an anti-Putin stance. What this means is, if Apple sent a threat notification, then independent corroboration of the existence of malware, of this kind of spyware, was established by Access Now and Citizen Lab through forensic investigation. The third and the final thing, which raises suspicion and a finger towards the union government, is a report in the Financial Times this March that India was looking to award spyware contracts beyond NSO Group and Pegasus because of the adverse public reaction, which approximately is 16 million US dollars and potentially may escalate to $120 million. And there are other companies such as the Intellexa Alliance, which may be bidding for it, which have also been documented recently in what is called as the Predator files.
I want to understand why all of them have gotten these notifications at the same time, because starting this morning, we have now seen at least a dozen people come out and say that they have gotten these notifications. What do you make out of that?
So one should remember that in 2019 as well as 2021, when WhatsApp, which is another company, sent notifications to its users on WhatsApp that your phone may have been infected because of an attack on WhatsApp by itself. At that point in time, WhatsApp had also notified these class of people within a similar time frame. This is because the threat actor should be acting to compromise phones, would be looking at a certain profile of a person, right? Because they have an interest. We have to do X. Hence, we have to target and get into the phones of this group of people. It's a defined body. It's a defined class in itself. And it will also then match the deployment of the software within a specific timeline. And hence, when it is discovered by a company such as WhatsApp or Apple that this occurred, okay, it will be the same software, potentially the same software or the versions of that software, malware software, potentially by the same vendor and potentially by the same actor which is used there. So it makes complete sense why the same notification has been sent to multiple opposition leaders as well as journalists at the same time.
You've also spoken about the timing and you've said it's interesting. Why is the timing alarming or interesting?
First round of infections happened in 2019 and then in 2021, right? And now they're happening right before we enter a very contentious general election, but also there are 5 state assembly elections which are coming up for polls within, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks, right, with results. And you have a very contentious public election which is coming up in next year in May. What getting into a phone does, as Raghav Chadha has explained in his tweet, is that it not only compromises a politician as an individual, in a sense that they are parliamentarian, they have to talk to their constituents, they have to take care, they have to possibly access the parliamentary portal, they have to do all kinds of things in order to fulfill their job function. But a politician also is quite often looking at the organizing of a political party. Where do you do a rally? Who are your top volunteers? Who are the people who are supporting you in A constituency versus B constituency? Which is a media request which come in. And quite often opposition politicians are also turning up the heat on the central government in respect of not only its record for the past 4.5 years, but 9.5 years, right? So a lot of this actually builds a kind of a power of whoever snoops into a phone, either consciously to take information, leak it, and thereby damage a person's own credibility, or at the very least be prepared through getting into a person's smartphone and knowing what are their networks, what are their strategies, what are they planning to do for the next pending elections.
What kind of surveillance is possible through this? Because we're fairly familiar with what Pegasus could do. How similar or different to that do you think this is? And what is the range of possibility?
So, Pooja, most people must be watching this on their smartphone or on their laptops, right? And every time, every few months, there's an upgrade. There's an app which is installed. So, software is not static. That's the first point, right? So, there'll be malwares and there will be malwares, which means that they will come with different kinds of functionalities. What we do know about Pegasus comes from the leak of a document which was annexed to a contract which was entered between NSO Group and I think the government of Uganda, which was filed by WhatsApp in the US court. So it had a manual of the NSO Group of what Pegasus spyware could do. And it was really disturbing. But those functionalities are not static. They may have grown in time because the sensors on your smartphone each year grow, right? And also the functionality grows. So the level of information collection grows. Now let's just take what was there in the handbook of the Pegasus software. This may be a different deployment by a different company with a different name, like Intellexa Group's Predator. So what could Pegasus do? Pegasus could not only switch on and switch off your mic, your camera, and also gather all kinds of details, your GPS details, because your smartphone is essentially today attached at your hip. Proverbially, it is always accompanying you even when you go to sleep. And but the level of data it can gather is, for instance, if there's inactivity from your side for about 6 hours to about 8 hours or for 5 hours, then it knows what time you sleep. If you do take a commute regularly, it gets to know, because some application or the other has GPS access and your operating system has GPS access if you've not turned it off, as to what are your daily movements. And the functionalities which were built into Pegasus were, if there were 5 or 2 phones or 3 phones which would at the same point in time, for instance, if 2 people who are infected with Pegasus are meeting, the mics would switch on automatically. If 5 people would switch off their phones at the same time, right, then it would send a notification to the operator that 5 people have switched off their phone in this geography, in a 1 kilometer radius, which means something's up, something's happening. So you can also do other forms of surveillance, such as ask a person to tail them, right? So the functionalities are immense. The amount of insight which data gives is not only recording directly, but also gathering anything which you type, for instance, access to your keyboard, even things which you backspace, so keyloggers. So I would say that the functionalities and the invasiveness is not static. It depends on the software deployment to deployment, and it can become incredibly invasive, even as per the handbook and the guide which was accompanying the Pegasus software, which is a few years back.
What about the legality of this? Is there any clearance required by the government? Is there any premise based on which they can go ahead? This is assuming that this is the government of India. So what kind of, on what grounds can they proceed to ensure that such, such surveillance is used?
So this is not surveillance, actually. This is actually getting into somebody's phone. This is not actually without their knowledge, looking at them and getting to know what activities they are doing, in the sense of a telephone tapping, for instance, which is always done through a third party. This is actually an act of hacking. And this is illegal under the Information Technology Act and is a crime. Secondly, the powers which do exist for surveillance under Section 5(2) of the Telegraph Act are only limited to the government intercepting information which is in the course of transit, or stop or look at or peep into messages. But messages by themselves do not mean you can switch on a person's camera or record their conversations when they're not talking on the phone, or switch on their a microphone in that sense, right? And its legality is questionable, right? However, the government of India, in its statement when the Pegasus controversy happened on the floor of the House, said that all act did not specifically state it did this activity, but said that with that with it comes within the scope of powers that it holds within Section 5(2) of the Telegraph Act. But if you look at the Telegraph Act and the provisions with respect to interception, they are primarily with respect to interception which is carried off conversations, which means conventional telephone tapping rather than getting into somebody's smartphone. And even if those rules may be twisted to say that, well, you can implement spyware by itself, you can't implement it. And a much more important thing to consider is that interception, even if we consider, for people who disagree, who say, Apar, you're just like, you're taking a very small, thin technical point. Interception always requires a satisfaction that it needs to be done for public order or in the interests of the security of the state. Where is the interest of the security of the state or public order by surveilling journalists and opposition leaders or leaders of think tanks, people who have no criminal cases against them, people who will, to a large extent, be challenging government power. In a sense, it's actually, and it's not open to any oversight. So, in a sense, the primary justification for surveillance itself is absent, even if we presume that utilization of spyware technologies fall within the powers of the union government to regulate telegraphs.
Interestingly, a few journalists from Telangana have also put out screenshots of the alerts they've gotten. And as our viewers know, Telangana is going for elections in about a month from now. Is that again a coincidence?
No, it's not. No, it's not. So just think, private sector contractor will like to most clients, right? And if people do study how arms contracting works, quite often arms contracting is not driven by ideology for the private sector; it's driven by profit. So it would. That's why you have things such as concepts such as arms race and things like that. It's basically race to the bottom, in which they may even be potentially state governments who have been approached or have contracted for utilization of spyware technologies, right? And I again say state because there is a degree of limitation in certain export controls in which only public authorities can procure these technologies. So a political party by itself cannot procure these technologies. It'll be a police department or it'll be an intelligence agency, which are again controlled by the political executive and the clear lack of denial by the union government.
There is a statement that Apple has just issued, and I'm just going to quickly read that out for our viewers as well. And I want to take your comment on what you read out of it. Apple does not attribute the threat notification to any specific state-sponsored attacker. State-sponsored attackers are very well funded and sophisticated, and their attacks evolve over time. This is a point you did touch upon.
It's just an abbreviation of their webpage which launches this product feature. So it's a non-statement. And we have to also consider Apple as a company which wants to do business in as many countries as possible. So it has to maintain market presence. Yet at the same point in time, it does value the security and the privacy of its devices, but it is a corporate entity. It is listed on a stock exchange, and its primary owners are shareholders. So it will want to maintain market presence in India, even as much as we may be just about 3% or 5% of a total pie of the total smartphones which are purchased, which are just Apple. It's still a sizable country in that sense. It's balancing, right? And we have to also remember, and viewers can look it up, what have been Apple's stances in China, for instance, and where it has maintained market presence in that sense.
All of this is not cheap. You did mention, throw out some numbers, but just give us an idea of how expensive it is to actually implement.
I don't know. It's a private negotiation.
Yes.
It's not disclosed in clear document. And I think there has been an investigation specific to Pegasus by the international consortium. I'm forgetting which looked at certain tendering documents, etc. It's a lot of money though. It's immense amounts of money, and it's sometimes sold as licenses, which means that if you are in an office and you are accessing Windows Word, right? Or in a large organization, you need to purchase a license for each user. So for each person who's targeted, actually, the government is, whichever government is, it is spending money, and a lot of money, right? And this is money which is from scarce public resources, which I like to say, in a deeply unequal country, which should be targeted towards towards welfare, where we are saying we don't have money, right? Because it is not towards the service of public safety or security of the state. It doesn't result in any kind of public order. It's essentially a political deployment.
Also, I want you to comment on the larger issue of data security. You have, in your tweets, you have questioned what is the digital infrastructure that India is building. Is there any, and what exactly do you mean by digital infrastructure? If you can explain that.
So, what we saw on the sidelines of the G20 was one of the principal policy interventions, which was centered, was digital public infrastructure, which is that quite often, to reach the socio-economic goals of any country, which includes the welfare state, you need technology to be there. And a model which has been proposed by India, championed through specific technologies, is what they call as digital public infrastructure. India is not alone in it. It's actually a much global movement. But the specific technologies which are listed within it quite often, such as identification through biometrics, which is Aadhaar, or payments which are done through electronic modes, such as a unified payment interface, UPI, which is used, or to break what they call as big tech monopolies in e-commerce, which is through the Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, are called as deployments of digital public infrastructure. But here's the thing, let's look at it a little closely. Sometimes we say these are successes, but how much of a success is Aadhaar if it results in consistent exclusion for people who do not get rations, where the biometric fault rates keep rising again and again? Is it a valuable intervention by technology to make a digital-only vaccination platform called CoWIN between the age groups of 18 to 38, right? Knowing that most people in India do not have smartphones, even in urban areas where there are higher income groups who have 3 to 4 mobile connections, but poorer income groups who don't. Or there is a gender-based distinction in which more men have smartphones rather than women, which means that at the height of the pandemic, in the second wave, more men from urban areas who are highly educated get vaccinated first than women. It goes against the underlying norm of vaccine equity, which is the very basis of ensuring how pandemics and epidemics are stopped. Okay, which epidemiologists have studied for a long period of time. And this makes me question that, okay, you can build a shiny dashboard. Okay, you can do all of these things, Pooja, but is it actually fulfilling the core public purpose for which you are building the technology in order to solve a problem? And quite often you're not. You're creating new problems. And in my tweet, I've actually talked about things which seem incredibly critical. That's because we don't hear it quite often. I've said that the model which we are adopting quite often is towards launching some digital innovation or intervention without much thought, or engaging private sector consultants, saying that they can do it better. The state does not have capacity to develop it. Secondly, when it shows problems, there's a pattern of denial. There's a pattern of actually co-option of the critics, or bullying them or threatening them. And finally, there are new announcements which are just being made again and again every day to keep in the press cycle. And that is just a form of bluster and distraction. So in effect, our digital public goods, which are listed on indiastack.global as 15 technologies, out of them just 2 work, and that too just work moderately or may create other problems. You don't have a very governance oriented or a public policy outlook in which you acknowledge faults, you fix problems. So the argument is not against technology. The problem right now is of governance. You're not using technology properly.
I want to understand, what is the legal way forward? Can this be taken up legally? And if so, under what provisions?
From what I foresee, I think for about 2 weeks to 3 weeks, we will notice some amount of public awareness. There'll be a high discovery of fact. People will get to know new things about this. Statements will come out. if we are not distracted by something shiny which is held again up through some kind of radical reform which is proposed, right? But I think what's important is for members of parliament, for people who are impacted, to center public attention around this, okay? Demand accountability, and if it's not forthcoming, if statements by the government of India are not forthcoming, there are pre-existing petitions in the Supreme Court of India with relation to Pegasus. In those cases, the petitions essentially had asked for disclosures from the government as well as fixing of accountability. The court, to first determine if the phones were indeed infected, constituted a technical committee under the retired Justice Ravindran of the Supreme Court, and that committee submitted a report. This was done because the petitioner said we can't give the phones to the same people who we think have surveilled us, right? These are journalists who said that basically we think that the government has surveilled us, and you're asking us to give them our phones again. So like aren't you so the court kind of heard that, but the report which is given by the committee, only brief portions of it were discussed uh, in oral remarks by the Supreme Court of India when Justice Ramanna was there. And since then, the case has not been listed. What I anticipate is for the new batch of victims, which have been notified by Apple, to write to Apple, to write to the cabinet secretary, Mr. Gauba, because he will know if the government has used it, and subsequent to that, to approach court and at least ask for a similar treatment, as disappointing it has been in terms of outcome, because there's no outcome. We don't even have the report. Even the petitioners have not been given a copy of the report till date by the Supreme Court. But I think judicial remedy is going to be one of the advanced steps which we may see in the next 10 days to 2 weeks.
I want to wrap up by asking you, what are the chances of this being a false alarm? Is there any chance that this could be?
The phone numbers of Minister Vaishnav as well as other functionaries of the government. So it's not only people who are opposing or critics of the government, but they'll be primarily targeted. It'll also be the people, certain members of the government want to know more about, whom will be their supporters. So please think beyond a tribal sense of affiliation towards a political party like a football club. Okay, I would ask them to please think about this a little deeply in terms of why they say that the emergency was such a rotten and terrible thing, right? In terms of state power, in terms of coercion and what's happening today, right? Because ultimately, the state always conventionally had the power in some way or the other to abuse and intercept your telephone calls. But today it has the power of switching on your camera and switching on your microphone and getting to know your movements. And imagine when this technology becomes broad-based. It first starts with people in power and then becomes a very regular occurrence for the normal people in India. It affects you directly.
Thank you so much, Apar. You did give us more clarity, but I must say at the end of it, we do have more questions than we started off with, and of course, that's for the government of India.
That's what That's Mr. Gauba to answer. That's not for me or the victim to answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
now,
you.
we don't know if the government will go ahead and answer any of those questions, but we will continue posing them, and we will hopefully come back to you as and when we have a little more clarity in what's happening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.